My name is Emily Dawson. For most of my life, I was invisible, just another maid in the background of someone else's grand story. But that night changed everything. I came to work at the Blackwood estate when I was barely 20. It was like stepping into another world, marble floors, chandeliers, and an endless garden that felt like something out of a fairy tale. Charles Blackwood and his wife, Evelyn, seemed to have it all. He was charming and commanding, the kind of man who made everyone feel small in his presence. Evelyn was elegant, every bit the perfect lady of the manor. Together, they looked like a dream. I admired them from a distance, always careful to stay in my place. I was there to clean, to serve, to make life easier for them. Nothing more. Or so I thought. It was a quiet evening, the kind that blurred into the others. I had just finished polishing the silver in the dining room when Charles walked in. He wasn't supposed to be there, he was always out late at work or socializing with friends. I straightened up, expecting him to give me some curt instruction, but instead, he smiled. "Emily, isn't it?" he asked, as if he didn't already know my name. "Yes, sir," I replied, keeping my head down. He didn't leave. Instead, he leaned against the table and started asking questions, about where I was from, my family, my dreams. It caught me off guard. No one had ever asked me those things before, let alone someone like him. I told him about my small village, my parents who worked too hard for too little, and how I'd always dreamed of something more but didn't know what that more was. He listened. Really listened. His attention was intoxicating, and for a brief moment, I forgot who I was and who he was. Later that night, a thunderstorm rolled in, cutting the power. The staff scrambled to light candles, but I found myself alone in the study, tidying up. Charles walked in again, this time holding a glass of whiskey. The flickering candlelight softened his sharp features, making him seem almost human, vulnerable even. "I always find storms unsettling," he said, his voice quieter than before. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the oak of his cologne mingling with the rain-soaked air. "You don't have to be so formal with me, Emily," he said, his voice low and disarming. "I'd like to think we're past that now." I froze, unsure of what he meant. Before I could respond, the lights flickered back on, breaking the spell. He smiled, a knowing, almost mischievous smile, and left the room as if nothing had happened. The next morning, I tried to shake off the strange feeling that lingered from the night before. I went about my chores as usual, sweeping the garden path when I felt a pair of eyes on me. I glanced up to see Charles standing at the window of his study, watching me. He didn't look away when our eyes met. Instead, he raised his glass in a silent toast, his expression unreadable. That was the moment I knew. Something had shifted, and my quiet, invisible life at the Blackwood estate would never be the same. Charles started showing up more often, always finding some excuse to talk to me. At first, it was small things, a question about the house, a comment about the weather. But slowly, those conversations turned personal. He'd ask about my thoughts, my past, even my hopes for the future. It felt harmless, almost innocent, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. At the same time, Evelyn seemed to be retreating further into herself. She'd always been composed and graceful, but now she looked tired, worn down by something I couldn't quite place. Her smiles were rare, and when they came, they never reached her eyes. I overheard the other staff whispering about how the strain of trying to conceive had taken its toll on her. It made me wonder if that was why Charles spent so much time with me. I hated myself for enjoying his attention. Every time he looked at me or said my name, it felt like I mattered, like I wasn't just another invisible part of the household. But the guilt was always there, gnawing at me. I told myself it was just harmless conversation. After all, he was married, and I was just a maid. What could possibly come of it? One evening, the Blackwoods hosted a formal dinner. The guests were the kind of people who spoke in low, polished tones and looked at you like you were furniture. I kept to the edges, refilling glasses and clearing plates, when one of the women made a cutting remark about the staff. "I don't know how you tolerate such clumsiness," she said, glaring at me as I placed a tray down. Before I could stammer out an apology, Charles spoke up. "I find the staff here to be quite capable," he said, his voice firm but smooth. "Perhaps it's just your glass that's difficult." A ripple of laughter spread through the table, and the woman's face flushed red. I should have felt grateful, but instead, I felt something deeper, more dangerous, pride that he had defended me, even if it was only in passing. Later that night, Charles asked me to help him organize his study. I hesitated, but he insisted, and I couldn't refuse. As I sorted through books and papers, he leaned close, his presence suffocating yet magnetic. "You're wasted here, Emily," he said softly, his breath warm against my neck. "You deserve so much more." I didn't know how to respond. My heart pounded as I tried to focus on the task at hand. That's when I found it, a photograph buried under a pile of documents. It was Charles and Evelyn, laughing together in the garden. They looked so happy, so in love. I stared at the picture for a moment too long, and Charles noticed. "That was a long time ago," he said, his voice tinged with something I couldn't quite identify, regret, perhaps? I put the photograph back and excused myself, my thoughts swirling. What was I doing? How had I let myself get so tangled in this web? Charles's charm was undeniable, but it wasn't just his smile or the way he carried himself, it was his vulnerability that pulled me in. One quiet afternoon, as the house basked in a rare stillness, he found me in the library. He leaned against the doorway, his eyes heavy with an unspoken weight. "It's not easy, you know," he began, his voice low. "Everyone thinks our life is perfect. Evelyn and we've been struggling for years. It's like living with a stranger." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to offer comfort, but another part, a louder, more sensible part, warned me to keep my distance. Yet, his words pierced through me. He painted himself as a man trapped, misunderstood, and yearning for something he could no longer find. "Sometimes," he added, stepping closer, "it feels like you're the only person who really sees me, Emily." Those words echoed in my mind long after he left the room. I tried to shake them off, but they clung to me like a shadow. That night, as I walked through the dimly lit hallway, I felt his presence before I saw him. He was waiting, leaning casually against the wall as if he belonged there. "Emily," he whispered, his voice soft but commanding. I froze. His hand reached out, brushing against mine, and before I knew it, his lips were on mine. The kiss was brief, hesitant yet charged with an intensity that left me breathless. When it was over, I stumbled back, my heart pounding with guilt and disbelief. "What are we doing?" I muttered, my voice barely audible. But Charles just looked at me, his eyes full of something I couldn't name. "I don't know," he admitted. "But it feels right." The days that followed were unbearable. Evelyn's demeanor shifted, though I couldn't tell if it was deliberate or my guilt projecting onto her. She became colder, her once kind words now laced with a subtle edge. I avoided her as much as I could, pouring myself into my work and staying late to escape the gnawing shame. Then came the gift. A delicate gold bracelet, nestled in a velvet box. Charles handed it to me one morning, his expression unreadable. "For you," he said simply. I didn't want to take it, but I did. The bracelet felt like a shackle, binding me to a secret I couldn't escape. Every time I looked at it, I was reminded of the betrayal it symbolized. The first warning came in the form of Evelyn's sharp voice. "Emily, I found this in your room." She stood in the doorway of the servants' quarters, holding the bracelet Charles had given me. The golden links sparkled in the sunlight, mocking me. My stomach dropped. It's a gift," I stammered, scrambling for an explanation. "From my aunt. She sent it for my birthday." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "Your aunt must be quite generous. This is no ordinary trinket." I held my breath, willing her to believe me. After what felt like an eternity, she sighed and left without another word, but I could feel her doubt lingering in the air. Later that evening, Charles found me in the kitchen. His presence, once comforting, now felt dangerous. "She suspects something," I said, my voice trembling. "Let me handle Evelyn," he replied smoothly, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Trust me, Emily. It'll all work out." But his reassurances did little to ease my fears. Charles started staying at the estate longer, offering vague excuses about business or household matters. Each prolonged visit only intensified Evelyn's unease. Her questions became more pointed, her gaze more piercing. And then the letters began. The first was slipped under my door, a single sheet of paper with bold, menacing words scrawled across it, "End it, or you'll regret it." My hands shook as I read the note, my heart racing. Who could have sent it? A jealous servant? One of Charles's acquaintances? I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was always watching, waiting for me to slip. The tension reached a boiling point during a weekend party hosted by the Blackwoods. The estate was filled with laughter and clinking glasses, but I couldn't enjoy a moment of it. As I carried drinks through the crowd, I overheard Evelyn confiding in her closest friend. "I think he's seeing someone else," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He's been so distant, so secretive. I don't know what to do." Her words cut deeper than any anonymous threat. I wanted to confess, to tell her the truth, but the guilt paralyzed me. Charles, oblivious to the chaos he'd created, pulled me aside before the night was over. "I'm making arrangements," he said, his tone confident. "We'll be together, Emily. You'll see. Just be patient." But his promises felt hollow, like the very foundation of our relationship, a house of cards, ready to collapse under the weight of lies. The day it all unraveled began like any other, polished floors, fresh linens, and my forced smile hiding a storm of emotions. But Evelyn's icy demeanor was sharper than ever, and I could feel her gaze burning holes into my back. By mid-afternoon, as I was washing dishes in the kitchen, she entered, her footsteps deliberate and heavy. She placed a manila folder on the counter, her hands trembling slightly. "Emily," she began, her voice low and unsteady, "I trusted you." I trusted him. I froze, my heart pounding as she opened the folder to reveal photographs. There we were, Charles and I, captured in fleeting moments of intimacy. A stolen glance here, a hand brushing mine there. The evidence was undeniable. I didn't mean for this to happen," I stuttered, tears spilling over. Evelyn's voice cracked, her anguish spilling out. "Didn't mean for what to happen, Emily? For you to betray me in my own home? For you to tear apart my family?" I couldn't answer. The weight of her words pressed down on me, leaving me breathless. That evening, Evelyn confronted Charles in the study. I wasn't there, but I heard the shouting echo through the halls. It was as though every suppressed argument, every ignored red flag, erupted all at once. "You lied to me, Charles." Over and over again. Evelyn screamed. Charles's response was quieter but no less cutting. "I made a mistake, Evelyn. But I never stopped loving you." When the shouting subsided, Charles found me sitting alone in the servants' quarters, clutching the bracelet he'd given me. His face was pale, his shoulders slumped. "She knows everything," he said flatly. "She's given me an ultimatum, her or you." For a moment, hope flickered in my chest. Was this the moment he'd choose me, fulfill all the promises he'd whispered late at night? But his next words crushed me. "I'm going to try and fix things with Evelyn. I can't lose my family." It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Every dream, every secret longing I'd harbored, shattered into pieces. Evelyn wasted no time. By morning, she'd ordered my dismissal. As I packed my belongings, the other staff whispered, their pity and judgment cutting like knives. I left the Blackwood estate with nothing but my shame, my heartache, and the lessons I'd learned too late. As I walked through the halls of the Blackwood estate for the last time, memories flooded my mind. The quiet mornings polishing the grand staircase, the laughter of the guests at lavish parties, and, of course, the moments that led to my downfall. Each memory was a reminder of what I'd lost and what I'd allowed myself to become. Packing my belongings was both a relief and a punishment. The small room I'd called home for years suddenly felt suffocating. I couldn't blame Evelyn for her decision. She was protecting what was hers. But the shame I felt wasn't just from her judgment, it was from my own. A few days later, as I settled into my new, modest flat, a knock on the door startled me. I opened it to find Charles standing there, his once confident demeanor replaced by an air of desperation. "Emily," he began, avoiding my gaze. "I need to ask something of you." He handed me an envelope filled with cash. "This is to help you start over. And, to ensure you don't talk about what happened. For Evelyn's sake, for mine." The insult stung more than any words could. After everything, he thought I could be bought. I pushed the envelope back into his hands. "I don't want your money, Charles," I said firmly. "I've already paid the price for what we did. You should go." For the first time, he seemed lost for words. With a defeated nod, he turned and left, leaving me standing in the doorway, feeling both broken and strangely free. Days turned into weeks, and I began rebuilding my life. One morning, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Evelyn. Her words surprised me. Emily, I've spent a great deal of time reflecting on what happened. While I cannot forgive you, I understand that Charles's betrayal was not yours alone. I hope you find the strength to move forward and create a life of dignity and self-respect. It's what we both deserve. Evelyn. Her grace in acknowledging the complexity of our shared pain gave me a sense of closure I hadn't expected. Now, as I sit here sharing my story, I hope you understand this. True happiness doesn't come from someone else's promises, it comes from valuing yourself first. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more bold confessions. Your support means the world to us.